to the second session. We've got three speakers running up to the lunch break. The first of those is
Michael Kipping, who you met earlier when he facilitated the panel discussion. Michael is a director in the Element MedTech space and is here now to talk a little bit about what we touched on this morning, regulatory pathways and how you navigate through those to best effect. So, Michael.
Thank you very much. So, what I'm going to try and do, and I use the word try, is obviously we've heard about funding mechanisms from NIHR and Innovate UK. So I'm going to try and weave together how kind of understanding your regulatory pathway can actually really help when you're seeking funding and ultimately get to market. Because ultimately the thing that we all have in common in this room, we're all from different companies, organisations, different job functions, but the thing that we're all striving to do is to improve patient outcomes. So, and we all do that in different ways, and it's, we all have an important role to play. But you need to get to market if you want to help people. So, I'm not going to talk through this, by the way, but definitions are really important. So we hear the term MedTech, health tech, medical device, IVD. So medical device is a legal term. So if you use that term, it's FDA or the EU or UK, whatever, have that's written into law somewhere. MedTech, health tech are not legally defined terms. So if I use the term MedTech or health tech, it's because I'm deliberately being a bit ambiguous. So my watch is MedTech. It's a wellness device. Tells me how lazy I am and how many steps I'm not doing. But it's not a medical device because it doesn't meet that definition. So first thing is understanding, well, what are you? Are you a medical device or a medicine or a consumer product or something else? Don't assume just because you're a medical device in EU or UK that you'll also be a medical device in the US or in China or somewhere else. You might not be. So you kind of need to think about that. As daft as it may sound, the definitions are slightly different. So you need to be conscious of that. From my perspective, if you're starting out, I would suggest looking at US and EU. If you understand your pathway to US and EU, you'll probably be on you'll have a pretty good understanding. So it's not ignoring other markets, but if you look at those two, that's most of the world right there. So if you can understand those pathways, you'll be on pretty strong ground. Within the EU, the space of health technology is, in terms of innovation, it's most patents published. I think last year, 2020. So over 14,000 patents published. Massive amount of investment in the area. As we heard from other speakers, most of the businesses in this space are SMEs, which is a key difference between sort of medical devices and MedTech and pharma. Pharma's dominated by big sopharma companies. So you've got a few big pharma companies. You've got lots of startups that get to maybe like phase 2 clinical trials, but then licensed to sort of big pharma, typically. Not always, but typically. Whereas with health technology, most of the businesses go all the way through the development process and then start generating revenues, or not, as the case may be. So they're good businesses, but they're not necessarily attractive to big medtech, to your Medtronics and Abbotts and people like that, because they can't scale the revenues. So they're not interesting for acquisition because they can't take the revenue and scale it using their sales and distribution mechanisms, which is why we have so many, partly why we have so many SMEs. But if you look at the number of people employed in the sector, it's quite comparable to pharma. So it's a really, really important sector. And you've got, in terms of risk management, you've got lots of little businesses rather than a few big ones. So actually it's kind of giving opportunities to people across the whole of the UK and beyond. But also, because it's such a heterogeneous market, so there's over 600,000 unique medical devices. So not versions of devices, but unique medical devices. That's ignoring software. So if we put software in there, it's over 1 million. And they're all a little bit different. Some are powered, some are active, some are non-active, some are implantable, some are non-implantable. So they're all, they all have their unique foibles. And by 2030, it's estimated that around 70% of devices will be active. And part of the drive for that was something that Mark mentioned earlier, the fact that hospitals are expensive. If you're treating someone in a hospital environment for serious sort of development of a disease, then it's expensive. So for heart failure decompensation, if I go into hospital, you're looking at sort of 7 to 10 day stay, 10 grand a time. Whereas if you can utilise connected devices to monitor them, so looking at early diagnosis and maybe prevention, then the outcomes for those patients are better because you can look at the onset of that heart failure earlier, so increase in weight and decrease in activity or heart rate variability. So it's better for patients because you can intervene earlier, but it's also a lot cheaper as well. So that's part of the drive to more and more connected devices. Famous quote, in this world, nothing is certain but death and taxes and regulation. I don't think he said the last bit, but anyway. So broadly speaking, I kind of, rightly or wrongly, I think of regulation as a bit of a tightrope. So on the left-hand side, you've got no regulation at all. So before, like if we go back to the 1950s, 60s, we didn't have a medicines regulator, for instance. But then we had the thalidomide scandal issue, which led to the medicines regulator being formed. So no regulatory requirements is bad. It's bad for patients, but it's bad for innovation as well, because having appropriate regulation and requirements really helps you understand what you need to do to get to market. So this is bad for patients. But equally, at the other end of the spectrum, where the requirements are really, really high and costly, that's bad, in my opinion, for patients, because it means you get less products on the market, because the cost of compliance outweighs the business opportunity, but also it makes it really hard to understand what you need to do to get to market. And on this line, I think we're over on the right-hand side at the moment. So it is a balancing act, and it's never quite right. And part of me thinks if everyone's a little bit unhappy, you may be maybe in the right sort of space. But kind of that sort of level of intervention is really critical. Nothing we can do about that here, but just to set the scene. Broadly speaking, there are some essential principles that you need to kind of look at, irrespective of geography. So the design, clinical evaluation, labeling, and manufacturing. And this is a life cycle approach. So needs to be sort of broadly aware of them, plus some additional caveats if you've got specific features like software and radiation, biological. But fundamentally, what a regulator's doing, so if that's FDA or whether it's a notified body or a UK approved body, what they're fundamentally doing is looking at benefit and risk. Benefit, not financial benefit to you as a company, but clinical benefit, and the risks and the residual risks associated with your device. So from an element perspective, we're really sat on the risk side of things. So the benefit bit comes in more with sort of clinical evaluation and investigation, where you're demonstrating how effective it is. Whereas we're helping more with risk. We're helping you understand what the risks are associated with your products, and then providing non-clinical testing and other services to help you minimize those risks as far as practically possible, but also generate the evidence you need to demonstrate that your products have sort of minimal risk to those regulatory bodies. So that's broadly where we sit. Dead easy, isn't it? Get a technical file, safety and performance in there, plus a quality management system audit. Bob's your uncle. It's easy, isn't it? Just where you go. Obviously, it's not easy, but there are those, again, two common factors. So you'll always have a technical file that has your safety and performance data in it, and you'll always require some sort of quality audit. That's consistent. Typically as well, looking globally, the non-clinical evidence tends to be pretty similar, whether you're going to US or China or whatever. So if your device is active and it's powered, you're going to have to do electrical safety testing, and as we heard from Eamon Hoxie earlier, it's they're international standards, so if you've tested to that here, it'll be acceptable in the US and China and elsewhere. The variations come in more around the clinical evidence side of things. Now, I'm going to talk more around this sort of space. So if you're basically an early stage business innovator, you're in this happily termed area called the Valley of Death. It's dramatic, isn't it? Effectively, this means you're pre-revenue and you're having to get funding to develop your product. Okay, so this is pre-market, and it's called the Valley of Death because it's hard at times to get cash unless you're mates with Mike or Lewis. So have a chat to them at the break. So yeah, a chunk of businesses kind of fall over at this stage because of funding. So it's funding Valley of Death. And you're going to need that cash if you want to move through the R&D stages. So one of the key things that you need to think about, and that the funders, whether they're the public funders or investors, is how is this thing going to make money? They're also going to look at you as a team and as an individual. Can you deliver this thing? And the underlying science and everything else. But fundamentally, how does this thing make money? So very crudely, you need to understand, well, what's the potential market and revenue and profits for your idea? Take away the cost of getting to that market and actually sort of selling your products, and that's broadly your opportunity. It's a bit simplistic. On the Innovate UK Edge website, and there are plenty of other websites as well, they kind of list how you look at the market side of things. So that's fine. Lots of people can help you look at the market. But typically, in terms of understanding the costs, timelines, and requirements of getting to market, that seems to me to be a bit harder to sort of understand. So, and if you don't understand the regulatory pathway to market, you don't understand evidence, timelines, costs, then you don't understand that opportunity properly. And my experience at Innovate UK was that I can count on one hand how many companies understood this side of things, which means it's a great opportunity for you if you're able to sort of put in those foundational points and understand that when you're going for funding. So definitely suggest you're looking at that. So again, I've broken this Valley of Death into two places. So this first bit is if you're doing, you're starting out, you're innovator, you're doing feasibility, proof of concept. At that stage, you do not need a really detailed regulatory strategy. And James is going to be talking about regulatory strategies later. You don't need to go into the weeds of it. You just need to understand. You need to understand what you're trying to do, so the intended use, kind of what sort of risk category, and what regulatory processes are there. You don't need to go properly into the weeds. If you understand those basics, you'll understand costs, timelines, and sorts of evidence you'll need. That's enough at this early stage, yeah? And that will then provide you with a lot of really helpful information that you can use when applying for funding. I've used Innovate UK questions, please don't. I've only used these because I worked there before, so I'm familiar with these. But just as an example, okay? These are the questions that the biomedical catalyst use. So how can understanding your regulatory pathway help you get cash? So, and this isn't a detailed list, but just to give you a sense. So when they're asking you about the health or healthcare need, well, that's really thinking about what's the clinical gold standard at the moment. So what do healthcare professionals and patients do right now? What's the intended purpose? What are the medical conditions and indications? And all of these points you'll find in the sort of the template of best practice for a technical file. So answering these questions actually helps you move along, helps you put that sort of regulatory foundation in place. So basically you can go through them, and even if you just answer these questions, it'll get you to think, but also if you're able to answer them succinctly, it'll really help you when you're going for funding, because you'll have a much more granular sense of what's required, those costs, those timelines. And I'll keep repeating that, costs and timelines, but that's really important. Because if you just say, well, I'm going to go launch this product for the UK, okay, so I've had that before where a company said, well, we're going for the UK and we're going to do it in 6 months, we're going to launch in 6 months. And you go, okay, well, how are you going to get that product to market? Well, we're going to go to MHRA for our CE mark. And you're like, no, you're not. For a multitude of reasons, you're not going to do that. Because they don't do CE marking, especially not now. They don't do any form of conformity assessment. and it wouldn't be 6 months anyway. So immediately, they might have had a brilliant idea, but immediately I'm thinking, they don't know what they're talking about here. And I know I'm a regulatory geek, but there are other, investors will do that due diligence. They will dig into it. They will test that business case. Even business cake sounds good. So for me, just answering these basic questions will really help you sanity check things, and even it may help you walk away. Walking away, we talk about helping businesses succeed, innovators and SMEs succeed, but actually, walking away early is a good output in some cases, because you can carry on, you can get a product to market, you can get your CE mark or your FDA approval. Doesn't mean anyone wants it, but you can do it, and you can spend a lot of time and energy doing it. So anything that helps you sanity check your idea and build that sort of pitch deck and case is got to be helpful. We'll have a little game now, very quick. How much time have I got? 5 minutes, right, okay. This is quite a basic game. We'll see how this goes. So we'll do intended purpose, okay? So who thinks that's a medical device? Okay, few hands. No, it's a kitchen craft cooking syringe, stroke meat injector, $2.49 off of the Amazon. All right. What about this one? Any hands? You're all going to be a bit reticent now. There's a few hands kind of like, I don't really want to commit to this. So this one is indeed a medical device. What about these? See where this is going, can't you, really? Okay, got one hand at the back. Okay, so these ones are pre-filled with sodium chloride salt solution, saline solution. So actually, these are combination product. So they're a medical device and a medicine's a combination product, because they're pre-filled with a specific amount of saline solution, which is then used in a healthcare setting. So two things. And then this one. No, this is pure pens. I don't know. It's got red ink or something. I don't know. It's not a medical device though. So the point of this jaunt is really, you can't tell just by looking at something if it's a medical device always. Sometimes you can. If it looks like a hip replacement, it's probably a hip replacement. But actually, kind of what you say about that product, the intended purpose, can take you down lots of different pathways. And if you accidentally say that your product can do certain things, it can take you down a pathway you really don't want to be going down. So like a class 2A or 2B or whatever, rather than a class 1. So really need to think about the intended purpose and then the sort of technical and scientific features associated with it. State of the art is technology. It's a state of the art associated with the product itself. It's not looking at the clinical application, it's looking at the product itself. Again, there's on these, you can have these slides afterwards, and I've put links to lots of documents in there that you can go away and read and sort of gen up if you're kind of interested. But again, this is a really critical point that notified bodies, FDA, whatever, will look at, because that's effectively one of the things that they're measuring you against. If we go to this point, this is where you've done your proof of concept. You've done, suddenly you're going for bigger bits of cash. Okay, you might be getting to a point where you're doing compliance testing with Element, or you're doing maybe some clinical work. And at this point, I would suggest it's in your best interest to have a detailed regulatory strategy that sets out kind of the evidence requirements that you need to hit to get your product to market, your clinical evidence requirements. So you properly set it out, because then you're set up for success. As we heard from Lewis earlier, it's not a linear journey, but it will be more linear if you've got a good plan in place at the outset. The other thing with the clinical side of things, it's if you've got a class 3 product, 2B or something like that, it's really expensive running clinical trials. So it's also worth thinking around what evidence do you need for your product to get regulatory approval, but also what do you need for market access, because persuading a healthcare professional to use your product may require slightly different evidence to a regulator. So easy, 1, 2, 3. Fundamentally, if you're class 1, happy days. It's really quick, really cheap, self-certified, dead easy. If you're not, and you're trying to get his product into the EU or UK, expect a challenging process, I think is a way to look at it. So it's challenging. There's more notified bodies than that now, by the way, as well. So it's challenging because you need to understand the requirements, but also there can be some challenges with notified body capacity as well. So the notified body is the one that's going to actually evaluate your technical file. For some classes, we heard the 18 months earlier, and that's a figure I try out often. But for some product groups, actually, there's loads of capacity, and you can get straight into a notified body now. I know for some class 3 products, there is capacity. But equally, for other products, you can be waiting 12 months on a waiting list to then go through a 12 to 18 month process. And also challenges with IVDs as well. Probably more challenges with IVDs. So again, understanding at an early stage, if you're going to have to go down that pathway and use a notified body, if you know that at the outset, then you can start planning for that. You can start that engagement process. You can start to understand, well, is there a great big waiting list, or can I get straight in? So it's just that early warning sign. And in terms of advice, who to go to, who do you go to for advice around regs? It's kind of. I've got one shout for Bivda down here, so yeah. So I'm going to be president of TOPRA next year. So that's the organisation for professionals in regulatory affairs. That's like a European professional body. There's a US one as well, but it's challenging. So I would say if you're unsure and you don't know anyone already, it's worth having a look at those 2 organisations and looking at who the members are. But I have to stop now. So thank you very much.